will study from a test lesson with Rabash. We'll be reading from Volume 2 of the Study of 10 Sefirot, Part 5. We are in the table of questions to topics. Question 104.
Look at question 104. He asks this: why in the first expansion, in Patzuf Galgalta, when Chokhmah and Bina ascend to Keter, when Chokhmah and Bina were refined, they did not cause raising of man there, as in the ascent of Chokhmah and Bina to Keter. So also the raising of the man to Keter, there was another coupling on the Sefirah of Keter. So the question is what I asked, he's asking. So look now at the answer for 104. The departure of the first expansion in Patzuf Galgalta is considered one departure. All at once, where only one vessel was made there. And also, all the 5 levels that emerged there. Ta'amim and Nekudot, from the refinement of the screen, are considered one light. Whereas here in the second expansion, in Patzuf Ab, the vessels preceded the lights. Since all the vessels with the sparks and the records of the first expansion passed to the phases of the vessels of the second expansion and were placed one beneath the other, even before the light of the second expansion returned to the Patzuf. Therefore, each and every vessel is discerned here as a unique matter in itself. That's why when the couplings of Zon we mean the clothing of coarseness, were made in the Malchut of Rosh, and the level of Chokhmah descended to the Patzuf Ab, it all clothed in the vessel of Keter. And the light was not expanding in any other vessel. Therefore, the vessel of Keter is considered like a unique Patzuf that has its own expansion and its own departure. And likewise, the rest of the vessels. Therefore, the vessel of Keter became capable of returning to its coarseness and to its coupling through the ascent of the lights of Chokhmah and Bina in the manner that will be explained below in answer 105. Whereas the vessel of Keter of the first expansion is connected with the 9 lower Sefirot as one level and one phase, and there is no difference between the vessels of Chokhmah and Bina and the vessel of Keter, since they're all together only one light clothed in one vessel. That's hard to understand. The question is simple. Why in Patzuf Galgalta we don't mention that the Nekudot refined and the Patzuf of Tamim went back to its place? That there was another coupling on phase 4 of coarseness, And here in Parzuf Ab we say that after phase 3 of clothing refined and ascended to Keter, then Keter again receives the phase 3 of coarseness and illuminates again as it was before the refinement. It's a very simple question. So here he gives an answer. As we know, there's a huge difference. The difference is clear. Here there still weren't any vessels. That's why he says that each and every vessel, all the vessels are 1 degree. That's why you can't say that the Keter would be with extra coarseness. That's 1 phase. It's like 1 phase departing, and now there are no changes. But here in Parzuf Ab, we already named them as empty vessels from Keter till Malchut. So what remained from Parzuf Galgalta? That's why when the light came to phase 4, when it came to the vessel of Keter, so they didn't expand in the rest of the vessels. We find as if the vessel of Keter is the Parzuf in its own right. Afterwards, when Parzuf Keter refined phase 4, the Tamim of Ab, and went to Nekudot of Ab, the degree of Chokhmah, meaning phase 3 of clothing, phase 2 of coarseness, that's a different Parzuf. That's why he says here that when it refined and ascended phase 3 of clothing to phase 3 of coarseness to the vessel of Keter, which is the Tamim of Ab, the coarseness returns to its place, like the degree of the ascending man that was kept for the upper light, that it'll give it something. So that answer is fine. But it's still difficult. If we always say that the last phase is lost, so how can I say that it got more coarseness? That he won't explain. That question remains. He explains that there can be man. Why? Since there were 2 vessels, like 2 Parzufs, the lower one ascends up, awakens it, and then the lower one wants. The upper one wants a coupling for the lower one, but the last phase is lost. How could we say that? The upper one was already refined. So now he uses its coarseness again. His own coarseness. The upper one, while here it's 2 degrees, like 2 Parzufs. That's why the lower Parzuf that it rises above, so the upper one goes back to where it was. That's what he says. What you have there is only 1 phase, so you can't say that it divided into 2 degrees. That we can see later in 105. What's difficult for me? What do you do with the rule that the last phase is a Parzuf on its own right? Why do I say that the last phase is lost if it's a Parzuf in its own right? Look at question 105. What is raising man? Why is he even asking that? He says in 104. Therefore, the vessel of Keter became capable of returning to its coarseness, to 4-3, and to its coupling through the ascent of the lights of Chokhmah and Binah. It's like raising man. So he asks, what is raising man? We should read it in 105. Every branch that is emanated and emerges from its root exists in its greatest completeness during the act of its emanation, before it's separated and comes to its own domain and to its own degree. What's written there? Again, every branch, I'm speaking about the branch now, that is emanated and emerges from its root. That's why everything that remains in the root still did not come to its own domain and its own degree, because then it is the place of its root, and it is considered the lower one, part of it, meaning eats what its mother eats. However, afterward, when it descends to its place, it is diminished and becomes smaller according to its law. And by this, a permanent connection is made between every branch and its root, whereby the root tends to enlarge its branch to the same measure it had while it was with it, before it descended to its place. Because of this, first beginning was rooted in the root, and it desires to maintain it perpetually. However, the vessels of the branch, due to their smallness, cannot receive the bestowal of the root, and they receive only according to the measure of their ability.
But this is during the time that they're in the root, yes? It eats what its mother eats. It has the measure of the greatness of the root in value. But when is it distinguished as her own phase? When it descends below its place. Therefore, when the branch returns and ascends to its root, the lower one, awakens the root to draw to itself those lights it had when it emanated it, and to adapt itself to the branch until it can bestow upon it all that greatness it was bestowing upon it since the beginning of its emanation. And this is the meaning of raising of man, which means that it awakens new lights in its root because of its ascent to it. What's written here? Look again. I'm going to repeat. Therefore, when the branch returns and ascends to its root, it awakens the root to draw to itself those lights that it had, the root, to the root when it emanated the branch. And then to adapt itself to the branch until it can bestow upon it all that greatness it was bestowing upon it since the beginning of its emanation, before it descended below also. There's two things here, yes? And this is the meaning of raising of man, which means that it awakens new lights in its root because of its ascent to it. Then the upper one needs to be in the same degree that emanated it. We'll go in a moment through this question also. Let's continue. You already know that there are two kinds of opposites. First of all, we can already say what the previous question was. We can understand the previous question. If the lower one rises to the upper one, and the upper one had in its nature to illuminate the branch, and while the upper one says to the upper branch its greatness, then it causes the upper one to once again be in its greatness. And then it will be receiving what it can receive. It turns out that the question we asked before, whether the lower one rises to the upper one and awakens, that the lower one needs, the upper one needs to give the lower one what the lower one can receive, not what the upper one can receive. So here comes the answer. Since when the upper one is emanated to the lower one and it was in the upper one in its great degree, now, as he wants to illuminate again to the lower one, then the upper one must be in its great degree, and greater degree, and therefore awakens it. So this is hard for me. We learned, when did Keter emanate Chokhmah? After it lost its degree of Keter, then phase 3 emerged. And here it can again be, like in order for the lower one in phase 3, it must be, phase 4 must be refined first. And here too, there must be the same action, to have 4 and refine, and then it will come out as 3. So here we can explain it this way. So you're asking, why does Keter need to give Chokhmah? Keter must be refined. I always have this question, why those who learn in first grade in school need to have a qualified teacher that will go through this and this and that. What do they learn there in first grade? The alphabet, or just how to dance. So there's a saying, a teacher that knows the Pentateuch does not know how to teach the students the Pentateuch, the Bible, the Torah. One who only knows the qualities of the Gemara cannot be the teacher of the Gemara. A bestower needs to be greater in order to be able to have something to bestow. It's also with Keter. If he wants to give to the lower one, phase 3, then it must be great. With 3, it doesn't go. This we see also in corporality. That's why the answer is that if the upper one needs to give the lower one phase 3, the upper one needs to be in a greater degree. If so, it causes the degree to be greater. But the difficulty is that the last phase is lost. So I don't have an answer. I asked a question. We learn the last phase is lost. So we asked, in the Partuv of the world of Nikudim, where in the world of Nikudim, there was, what was in the world of Nikudim? 4-3. The Gadlut of the of Atzilut also is phase 4-3. Although the last phase is lost. And as we said, the last phase is lost. It has no more the force that it had before. So I explained that in the world of Atzilut, we learn that Gar of Chokhmah does not illuminate, only Vak of Chokhmah. So I asked, in the Parzuf of correction, we learned that the first restriction illuminates Gar of Chokhmah there. If the last phase is lost, after all, we need Gar of Chokhmah. So we also learned that the last phase is lost, meaning the world of Nikudim had the level of Keter, it expanded below to the king of Dat. Here in Atik, it cannot bestow to Malchut anything. If so, to give to himself he has, but what can he bestow to the other? Here too, there's the last phase that is lost, meaning its degree was diminished from what it had before. So here he wants to explain what we're saying, that this level where we say Matin expands in Keter, that the lower one causes, and the last phase is lost of itself. So the allegory isn't like the explanation. So one, we say that expands in Keter. Here we're talking already about Guf. So what was before it departed? Was there more expansion in the Keter? And after the departure, was it the same thing? Before it did not illuminate only for the vessel of Keter, and now it doesn't illuminate more than the Kli of the Keter. What was in the world of Nikudim was before it illuminated to the Guf of Nikudim, and Atik does not illuminate in the phase of the Rosh. It doesn't illuminate anything to the lower ones. And here we see no change. Before, it used to expand below, only in the Kli of Keter to the Guf, and now also in the Kli of Keter of Guf. If so, what is the change from now that it wasn't before? Now, accordingly, I don't understand this answer. So, while phase 3 was emanated, from the Kli of Keter. How did it not have something, or did it have it? It already didn't have it. In everything, it could have given to him. Don't run. Meaning that it had 4, 3, and it was lost. And it didn't remain with 3, it remained in 3. Now, 4, 3, the upper one doesn't have. 3, the upper one doesn't have. What will it give him? Before it had 4, 3, and it was refined to 3, 2, and 3, 2 it already gave to him. Now 3 is already refined. What will it give him? It doesn't have anything. Not 4, 3, and not 3, 2. He doesn't have the upper one now. Oh, the Chokhmah needs 3, 2. Chokhmah does not need 2, 1. 2, 1 belongs to Binah. Now we're talking about Chokhmah. Why? Chokhmah demands. This is how you should learn it. Binah does not demand a thing. We're learning that this is another thing. When phase 3 was refined, 2 were confused, and then later. And then it went descended. We learned now that the light of Chokhmah that was refined, this is where we get confused. 3 rose to Keter, and the light of Binah that was in the Kli of Chokhmah descended to Binah. Don't forget. It turns out that now Chokhmah is ascended to Keter. It was in Keter, not phase 4, not 4 of clothing, or in 3 of coarseness, that you could say that something was refined and give to him, and also 3 of clothing it doesn't have. Who would give it? Therefore, it's nothing similar from there. In Binah, there's here, we get confused. What here? There's the illumination itself and the refinement alone. We'll see later. We'll see this later. It causes the upper one to receive again 4, 3, in order to be able to later give to Chokhmah. Phase 3, Binah took the remnants from Chokhmah, and Chokhmah remains upon. Chokhmah is 3. It remains in 2, and 2 received Binah. But Chokhmah 3, there is no 3. We learned that it demands 3. Therefore, the upper one must awaken itself to receive those lights. But phase 3 was refined. What remains? 2. And 2 receives Binah. You understand this? We're going to move to... You already know that there are 2 kinds of turning of the anterior downward, in the manner of the emanating of the lower level. The first is the turning of the anterior of the vessel, in which the Keter cancelled the anterior, which was only for the bestowal of Vak. You didn't learn this yet. And raised his posterior, which was for the bestowal of Gal, and made it into anterior in order to emanate the male of the vessel of Chokhmah. I'll explain this later. The second is the turning of the anterior of the phase of the screen, which is the refinement from the great coarseness to the lesser coarseness, namely the refinement of phase 3 of the female of Keter to phase 2, which is the level of Binah. And she did this for the female of Chokhmah. He says this. There are 2 phases, 2 discernments of anterior and posterior. Anterior, panim, is called what's more important. Posterior, achoraim, is considered what is not so important. An explanation. An example. We'll talk about coarseness. 4 is considered more important than 3. The 4 brings the level of Keter, whereas it cannot, in order to bestow only 3 phases, and the lower and smaller degree is called the posterior. Let's say one who has phase 3 of coarseness Upon 2, if it can, it will do only on 2, which is called 2 towards 3, the posterior, not like that. Now there's an additional anterior and posterior called panim and achoraim, face, anterior and posterior of the vessels. An example, the anterior with Binah we learned is called chasadim. The posterior with Binah is called chokhmah.
Let's go to the next part of the lesson,